Hi, I'm Bill Mowery, author of The Ways of the Alongsider, and a training tip for today is how do you develop good disciple-making conversations using good questions? You know, questions are powerful tools, aren't they, in creating good conversations. They're kind of like a hand grenade, that goes off in our lives and it kind of explodes in new discoveries. It explodes and challenges values and beliefs and assumptions. Questions are powerful tools that we need to include kind of in our toolbox of coming alongside of others, helping them become wholehearted followers of Jesus Christ. You know, Jesus modeled asking good questions, didn't he? There's over 300 questions that are found in the Gospels. You know, when we ask good questions, we create good conversations. And if there's one thing that we want to do as alongsiders, is that we want to engage people in life-changing, transformative conversations, and questions are the key to help make that happen. You know, as I've thought about it, there's several different types of conversations, and with these different types of conversations come different types of questions. For example, we have social conversations, and we ask questions about, what'd you do last weekend? Hey, did you watch that TV show last night? How's your yard going this year? And so with social conversations, we have social questions. Now we'll also have supportive conversations. These are conversations we have with friends. We talk about, hey, how are you doing? What's happening with the kids? You know, how's it going with your wife these days? You know, how can I be a help and support to you at work? You know, I know you're having some challenges there. And so we just want to come alongside of one another and in conversation support one another, and we ask some supportive types of questions. Now the kinds of questions too and it's a particular type of conversation, are disciple-making conversations. And in disciple-making conversations, we want to ask some disciple-making questions. Now what are the marks of a disciple-making conversation? Well, I'd like to suggest that one is that disciple-making conversations are intentional, they're purposeful. Also, disciple-making conversations are in the context of a relationship and a friendship. It's a relationship where my trust has been earned to be able to give you that, ask that kind of question, and you're giving me trust, the ability to ask you some personal conversation questions. And so that this disciple-making conversation is that it's intentional, you know, it's built in the context of a relationship. There's often a specific topic that we're talking about, and that specific topic is going to lead to a greater understanding, and with that greater understanding comes a sense of application. I'm going to make some action steps from that. I think you can see that a disciple-making conversation is different from either a social or a supportive conversation. And because it's different, we're going to ask some different types of questions. Now, I'm going to do a little summary of what you've looked at in Chapter 8 in The Ways of the Alongsider on the Way of Discovery. Now, as we think about what are the kinds of questions we want to ask in a disciple-making conversation, I'd like to suggest that we start with asking questions that help people frame a picture of what God wants to do in their life in a particular area. Now, think of it this way. Suppose that somebody you're an alongsider with in a discipling relationship, and they've got some real questions about finances. So that when you get together, you want to begin talking about asking some questions to help them to discover God's picture of a healthy financial life. What is God's picture of a healthy financial life? And so you might go to a passage such as in Matthew 5:19 through 24, where Jesus talks about not laying up for yourself treasures in heaven. Treasures on earth, but you want to lay up treasures in heaven. You don't want to be enslaved to two masters. You can only have one master. And so that can be a starting point for beginning to ask some questions for people to develop a picture of a healthy financial life. You might ask these questions as, well, you know, what's the difference between laying up treasures in heaven and treasures on earth? What are some of the moth and rust that we experience today? Why do you think God challenges our view of finances to think about it from a heavenly perspective? What do you think it means to have two masters? How do we know whether God is the master of our finances or whether we're the master of our finances? Well, if we could capture God's picture of a healthy financial life in this passage, what would we state about that? So we're asking some conversation questions because we want to have discovery taking place. This is a dialogue and not a monologue. I'm not prescribing to him or her God's picture, but I'm helping them to discover that from the Word. And so we will help them form a picture of a healthy life in the area of finances. Now, we want to give them a sense of a realistic assessment of where they are. What is their current reality regarding finances? Here's a great question to ask. If you were to hand your checkbook over to Jesus Christ and he were to ask you, let me look at your checkbook, what do you think would be some discoveries he would make about how you're using your finances? How do you think he'd assess and evaluate your checkbook? How would he assess and evaluate your budget that you have? Boy, that gives me a current reality, don't I, of where I'm at in my picture of finances versus where God is and what he'd like my finances to look like. So I'm creating a picture, helping people to get a current reality of where they are, and then I want to talk about an application or an action step. And so that I might ask something that, boy, Jesus had this conversation with you about your checkbook. What did he say about that? And, in light of what he said, what do you think would be some action steps you'd want to take? What are some action steps that you could take in the next 24 hours where God is your master and your money is not your master? What could be some steps you could take to ensure that you're always putting God first in your finances? So now we're talking about application. Remember, in a disciple making and alongside our conversation, you're helping people move towards an application. Now again, you're not going to have this type of conversation with everyone. They're going to be with a selected few. These are the men and women in your triad, the men and women you're coming alongside of personally and relationally, where you've both earned the right and they've given you the right in the context of a relationship to have those kinds of conversations where you're asking those kinds of questions. All right, we talked about questions are like this hand grenade that explodes and goes off in our minds and our lives. And when those questions explode within us, we come with new insights and new values and new applications. So in your conversations this next week, particularly those of the men and women that you're discipling, ask some good questions, create some disciple-making conversations, and begin to see how God is going to use that to transform people's lives.